Hi, how's it going? Thank you so much for being here today. We're going to be talking about chargeback models and how we've increased the granularity of those at our company. So my name is Nicole Gauer. I am the lead for FinOps at Evernorth.
And I'm Sergio Armenta. I'm a cloud engineering advisor and the FinOps technical lead at Evernorth.
So who is Evernorth? You probably have not heard of Evernorth before, but we are part of the broader Cigna group. So Cigna, well known for health insurance, but really a total health services company. Evernorth specifically is a brand under that umbrella. Specific focuses include driving out waste in the system, predicting diagnoses, increasing access to care, access to prescription medications, and really connecting your end-to-end care journey. So Evernorth also includes a lot of our shared services, like our technology organization. And what that means for myself and for Sergio is that as part of the broader Cloud Center of Enablement, we are responsible for cloud enablement for the entire enterprise and cloud spend for all of Cigna. So a little bit about our public cloud journey. We formed our Cloud Center of Enablement in 2018. We had 2 applications that built new capabilities in public cloud that year. Before that, people were paying for their AWS accounts off of their corporate cards. From there, we've seen rapid growth. So we now have a large cloud COE team with capabilities across consulting, foundational engineering, policy as code, FinOps, platform assurance, and more. And we have 4 cloud service providers now in our environment with just a lot of enablement across the enterprise. So a little bit about that rapid growth. We wanted to show you from a FinOps slant our spend over the last few years. So a few things that you'll notice on this slide. The first is that we have multiple cloud service providers, which is what CSP stands for in this case. So we have a multi-cloud strategy. We have a primary cloud service provider, and then we will use other cloud service providers when they have a differentiating service where it makes sense for our company. You'll also see a big jump in 2021 to 2022 on that secondary cloud service provider. So the reason for that is mergers and acquisitions. We acquired a company that was born in the cloud on Azure, and so we weren't going to move them off of that workload, instead kept them in Azure. With this steep growth curve, it's really been high cloud adoption for new workloads for us. And FinOps has been a foundational capability along the way. So we use Apptio tooling for enabling our FinOps practice, and we've had chargebacks since very early in the Cloud Center of Enablement being stood up, really due to executive sponsorship.
So let's talk a bit about our chargeback journey. From the start, we decided to implement the chargeback model at an account or subscription level. This allows each team and organization to completely understand their cloud usage costs. We do this by aligning the responsibility of cloud service spend to the corresponding development teams. As shown on the slide, the account chargeback is a combination of direct costs and shared costs, with direct costs being expenses that go directly into a cloud service provider service spend for individual accounts, while shared costs are prorated expenses that go into a cloud service provider or the enterprise's shared services that span multiple accounts. So this slide was actually presented at a previous FinOps X by our ex-colleague and friend, Vic Sluja. Vic also had a talk on sustainability yesterday, which I hope some of you were able to attend. But the table shown here shows the amount of detail that we provide to teams for account-level chargebacks. It has useful information for teams, such as their direct account costs, and then shared costs, like charges for foundational engineering accounts, cloud service provider support costs, chargeback for the use of savings plans and reserved instances, data transfer costs from shared networking solutions, and third-party tooling costs. Let's look a bit deeper into the savings plans and reserved instance chargeback calculation. So this metric is derived from our third-party tooling, Cloudability, and Bill of Service, but you can query this directly from cloud service providers like AWS. We have a list of centralized RI and SP purchase IDs and chargeback for that discounted rate usage by leveraging the adjusted amortized cost associated with each account. This enables us to charge savings plans under certain instances to all the accounts that are actually leveraging them.
What we started to see, though, was this account-based model breaking down. And so for different personas across our team or our stakeholders, we were seeing challenges emerge. The first gap that we saw was for us as a FinOps team. There were certain charges that you could not allocate back to an account-based level. And so based on that, we needed a different way to allocate back charges. Then, as a broader cloud center of enablement, we were trying to encourage teams to create shared services or shared platforms. We'll use those two terms interchangeably today. And so offering shared services is a big part of our culture at Cigna. We try to reduce duplicate work so that there is faster cloud enablement for our different teams across the enterprise. The idea behind these shared services would be one team within technology is creating a service that other teams within technology can consume. So think of that as something like EKS. EKS is complicated to manage. We have a shared EKS platform that teams across technology can use. But in the account-based model, only Cloud COE shared services were being charged back to the enterprise. And so anybody that was hosting one of these shared platforms would see all of those charges coming into their account. This was a really big problem because it would be very expensive to host a shared service platform, and so leaders didn't want to do that. In addition, finance was going to have trouble with demand planning for those teams and unfair allocation to the wrong business units. This was also an issue for software as a service owners, so the same thing, the cost burden for that software as a service platform was going to be allocated maybe to the wrong team or the team that wasn't using it. And beyond that, our technology teams that were consuming these cloud services weren't going to understand their total cost of operating. So they wouldn't see their end-to-end charges, wouldn't understand maybe the ROI on moving into public cloud, and so we needed them to have the right access to information as well. And lastly, with these different shared services, some teams wanted to layer in charges that weren't cloud usage-based, maybe a labor charge for supporting the platform, and so we needed a way to allocate that back.
To solve these layers, to solve these challenges, we've introduced a second layer to our chargeback process, shared platform chargebacks. So what's on the slide is a simplified version of our process, which starts with the cloud COE paying the monthly bill, which includes charges from all platforms. Then each platform's expense center is charged for the services that they use that month, allowing the cloud COE to recover their balance. Finally, all applications that are consuming a given platform are charged based on the relative usage of that platform, allowing each platform to recover their balance. So pretty straightforward, right? Let's get into the progress we've made so far.
So this idea has evolved a lot since it was formed. The idea actually started before I was even involved in FinOps. And so we had one chargeback implemented in Kafka to start off, specifically only for one cloud service provider. The data ingestion for this was completely manual, so the platform team had to upload that data monthly into our FinOps tooling, and there wasn't a consistent experience or process built around it. We've grown a lot to where we are today, and so I'd encourage you to take small steps towards implementing this model. So today, we have over 8 of these shared platform chargebacks. They span across 2 cloud service providers, so there's a consistent experience for our consumers. The data ingestion is fully automated, so we have monthly schedules to bring the data into our FinOps tooling. And a lot of work has gone into process creation as well. We have a request process, we have documentation on data ingestion, we have user guides established, and so all of this has really helped us with this process.
So before we get into the chargeback process flow, let's touch on some of the prerequisites that we've put in place to get to where we are. The first one is account creation. This is an internal tool which automates the creation of AWS accounts and Azure subscriptions. This tool adds baseline security and best practice guardrails to all new accounts, as well as automated integrations with all the tools that we leverage internally and externally. This includes integrating with Cloudability. Amongst other things, it also adds cost allocation tags at an account level, which, as we know, is crucial for any FinOps process. The second piece is platform maturity. So for us to do a chargeback for any platform, that platform must be in production, incurring costs, generating billing or usage data, and having a customer base of other teams. So the first step of our chargeback process is data ingestion. We need to ingest the billing or usage data that the platform has into our FinOps tool, in our case, Aptio's TBM Studio. So let's say that a platform has gone through all the prerequisites that I mentioned earlier. They could engage us by filling out an intake form hosted in ServiceNow, and in that form request a platform chargeback. We process the request and provide them documentation on how to save their billing data on an S3 bucket and make it available for Aptio to ingest. Following this guide, they create a cross-account role and save their billing data in S3 bucket, where they also modify the bucket policy and the KMS key policies associated with it to allow for least privilege access to this data. On our side, we create a data link connector which is able to leverage the cross-account role and pull the data into TBM Studio. Once we test the connector and it works successfully, we automate data ingestion so that it happens at the beginning of every month or whenever the data is made available. Now that we have the data in Aptio, we can start the showback and chargeback processes. So we work with the platform team and our Aptio resources to come up with a chargeback model that makes sense for the platform. Then we create a showback dashboard which visualizes their billing data. We tailor each visualization to the needs of the platform and its consumers. Once the dashboard is finalized, the team validates that the cost allocations are correct, and we move to the final stages. So the platform team is in charge of communicating to their consumers that the chargeback will be occurring. Once we set a date, we work with the finance controllers to execute the chargeback. In order to define the role and responsibilities of each persona involved in this process, we've come up with this shared responsibility model. Sharing this early on helps set expectations and reduces the chance of friction in the process. So a lot of the responsibilities shown here I've already covered in the last couple of slides, so I'll focus on one that I haven't. For every chargeback, we require the platform team to document their chargeback model. And we do this because it ensures that the team understands the model and is able to answer questions on it. It helps us keep track of all the different models as the number of chargebacks that we maintain continues to grow. And it allows consumers who are curious about their charges to investigate them.
So now we're going to talk about those different chargeback models. As Sergio mentioned, the chargeback model that you decide to use should be a collaborative decision between your FinOps team and the owner of that spend. The reason for that is, as a centralized FinOps team, hopefully we can provide them with some different frameworks to get started. We can also let them know if maybe the model is too complex that they're looking to implement. The platform team is the owner of the spend, and so they are going to best know their cost drivers and maybe what the right way to allocate that spend to their customers is. So we're going to talk through 4 different models, 2 with some detailed implementation so that you can see the data sets, the dashboards, all of that, and kind of how we've set that up. And hopefully this will help you with understanding which of these models will work for the applications or shared services at your company. So our first scenario is with Amazon Q Developer, formerly known as Code Whisperer. And so for this service, we weren't able to allocate it back by AWS account because you don't need an AWS account at all to use the service. And so what that meant for us is that we have a AWS organization. The charges per user were coming in at our payer account level. These charges are based on the days per month that you use the service. So if you use the service for a full month, it would be $19 per user. So what we decided to do for this scenario was implement an even split model. This is going to be your simplest, most straightforward implementation where you're going to take your shared costs, in this case Q Developer, and divide it up evenly among your consumers. We did this at the user level, but for different applications, maybe you would want to do it at an app-based level or whatever makes sense for you. So the reason to use this model is simplicity. If it's relatively fair to split the charges evenly, then it's really easy to implement. For us, with this $19 per user per month charge, it didn't make sense to prorate that data back and say that Sergio only used the service for 15 days, so he should be charged half the price that I should if I used it for the full month. To implement this, we did need to integrate some HR data into our FinOps tooling, which has been useful for other apps as well, so I'd encourage you to do that. But that was really the most complicated part of this implementation. Our next scenario is with Azure ExpressRoute. So with Azure ExpressRoute, you get a private connection from your on-prem network back to your public cloud network. And this is something that we manage centrally through our Cloud Center of Enablement, so we needed to bill it back to our customers. We talked a little bit about mergers and acquisitions at the beginning of this talk. And so for Azure, we have multiple tenants. We have our legacy Cigna tenant, which had the per subscription chargeback that we talked about in the beginning. But then we also have another tenant from our merger and acquisition that is centrally paid. And so we didn't have an easy way to split up the spend for this. Based on that, we found that we only had a few key consumers of Azure ExpressRoute with fairly consistent usage. So we decided to implement a fixed percentage model. The way that this model works is instead of your split being even, you're going to assign a percentage of the spend to one of your consumers. This requires you to have some knowledge of maybe what's a fair way to divide up the spend. So for us, we worked with our networking team, and they were able to tell us who should be charged what each month. Again, this is pretty simple, so one of the easiest models to implement, but does give you a little bit more flexibility than the first model that we talked about. You'll want to use this when the allocations are pretty consistent month over month. So you don't want to be maintaining a table every month where you're changing the allocation to each customer. That's going to be a headache, so try to keep it pretty consistent. This is also a good option if maybe bringing in a data source to divide up the cost is a challenge. Which brings us to our third model. So some teams are looking to use a specific metric or cost driver to divide up their platform spend. For us, our Databricks team found that DBUs would be an equitable way to divide up their spend. For other teams, Kafka, Click, our Direct Connect and Transit Gateway solutions found that bytes in or out or some combination of those would be a more fair method to allocate spend back. And so for some of these platforms, the cost driver is already in your existing tools. That was true for us. Bytes was something we got in our Apptio Cloudability product, versus for other teams like Databricks, DBUs was not something that we had in our data set today. So we had to ingest that into our tooling. Which brings us to Model 3, one of our most popular models at Cigna. And so what we did here is implement the cost driver that the teams had identified as a meter for their spend every month. This is a great model if you have maybe one or a few cost drivers. And so it's really fair because you get to change that allocation month over month based on the units that the teams are consuming. It's more complex than the other models that we talked about, but just because you need that additional data source, but it's definitely worth implementing for some of our larger spend services.
So to accurately represent this model, we created a billing file with dummy data based on some of the existing platforms that are leveraging this model. This is a sample monthly billing file. In column 3, you can see that there's a list of different teams. Each one can have one or more applications and is tied to a cost center. The metered usage for this platform is a combination of storage, data access, and data transfer costs, each priced accordingly. To calculate the total team cost, you multiply the quantity of the metric times the unit price. So let's go through a quick example. If we look at Team 3's metrics, starting with storage, we can see that they used a little under 4 terabytes this month. We can multiply that by the unit price to get the storage total. If we do the same for data transfer and data access, and then sum all these up, we get their total charge for the month, which is a little under $308. So let's say that a platform comes to us with this billing data and everything looks good. We start ingesting it into Apptio and work with them to create a showback dashboard in TBM Studio. I will say that you can leverage any tool that you have access to internally for this. It doesn't have to be Apptio specific. That's just our tool of choice. So in this showback dashboard, in the top left, we have the total charge for that platform for this month. Below that, we have platform usage by team. So this is a combination of all the different metrics that are associated with cost. You can see that Team 2 has the most usage, which typically translates to the most cost. To the right of that, we have a cost breakdown by cost center. So this is what we're actually going to look at when we go to execute the chargeback in terms of allocations. The cost center highlighted here, ending in 456, is going to be paying for a third of the total cost for this month. And then below that, we have application cost details. So this table has all the information needed for the platform team and the consumers to be able to investigate any cost. And if we look at row number 2, we see that the cost center that we had looked at in the pie chart is the one that's tied to Team 2. So we're able to correlate that Team 2 is going to be the one that's paying the most this month.
So that brings us into our fourth model. We encountered some platforms where the spend was not easily metered, and so they maybe couldn't tag that spend, or it wasn't directly attributable to a specific expense center or team. And so we have a couple examples of that. The first example is a shared S3 storage solution. We have a team that will host S3 buckets in their account for other teams across technology. And so in this case, a bucket is easily taggable. The storage and operations spend on that bucket can be directly attributed to the team that's tagged. However, there is untaggable spend to that account, let's say the CloudWatch alarms for alerting on the bucket, and so we needed a way to charge that back to the appropriate team. This was also true for our shared EKS solution that I mentioned earlier. So we are able to see a price per namespace due to the Cloudability Metrics agent on our clusters, and based on that, we can charge that back to a specific team, but we had shared charges in the account that we couldn't allocate back. For Snowflake, our team was able to provide us a data set to ingest that gave you Snowflake units by namespace, but this team wanted to introduce a labor charge for supporting the software as a service platform, and so we needed a way to share that cost across their different consumers. And lastly, with MongoDB, we had a cluster cost, but wanted a way to allocate back the enterprise subscription to the users of Mongo. So what we did here is leverage those direct charges or the taggable charges and calculate a proportion of the rest of the shared cost. So it's almost like the part that you can directly measure becomes the meter for the spend that you cannot measure. This is as fair as possible for an implementation, so that's really the reason to use it, but it is the most complex model that we have implemented today at Cigna. So you'd want to make sure that there's a significant amount of spend to make it worth implementing this model. The huge advantage here, though, is the ability to layer in something like a labor charge. Before this, we only could look at our cloud consumption data and spread that out, and so this is definitely a benefit to our platform teams.
So we've also created a billing file for this model. This one's based on the storage example that Nicole went over. So the tag spend for this one is storage, and the untagged spend is technical support and log access. Like Nicole mentioned, these untagged charges cannot be tracked by team or cost center, so they're charged in proportion to the tag spend that we can track. Once we have a percentage of the direct spend the team makes up compared to the total, we can calculate the shared costs. Adding these up gives us the total team cost. So let's pick on Team 3 again. If we look at their tag spend, we can see that compared to the total storage spend of the platform, they make up 7%. We use this percentage to get their share cost and then add these up to get their total, which is around $460. We've also created a showback dashboard for this model, and it looks a lot like the previous one. So for this one, I'll focus on the filters. We have a filter for team, one for application, and another for cost center. These are all useful for scoping down the information for consumers to get the right level of data that they need. So if we take a look at Team 1 and Team 3 and compare them, we can see that they make up a little less than half of the platform's total cost, with the bulk of the cost being on Team 1. If we look at the application cost detail data, we can see that Team 1 has 3 applications, while Team 3 only has 1, with Team 3's application costing around the same as Team 1's cheapest application. So this helps us know like where these costs are coming from and where's that difference in cost coming from as well.
So that wraps up the 4 models that we're going to cover today. But we wanted to reflect on the results we've seen, how to measure success, and highlight some of our learnings so far. So first, for the results, the key reason to implement this is going to be spend awareness and accountability. You want to make sure that the right spend is allocated to the right people within your enterprise. However, all of the personas that we highlighted before are also benefiting. So for our leaders, they are now incentivized to own a shared service platform. And what that means is that across product, leadership, and engineering, we are seeing a much easier rate of cloud adoption. There are lower barriers to entry because they can consume these shared services. So hopefully, as a product team member, you're seeing increased throughput for your engineers, or as an engineer, you don't have to support as many applications in production because you're using one of these shared services that is already supported. In addition, as a FinOps practitioner, this has been really helpful for our team. We have a limited number of complex chargebacks. So rather than having one of these shared platform chargebacks for every single account, we have 1,000 accounts in our enterprise just across one service provider. We're really focused on maybe 10 of those having a detailed chargeback implementation. It does give us the optionality, though, to make sure that we can allocate more of our spend back. And lastly, for our partners in finance, we have a consistent mechanism for handling those shared costs, which is really important. So we wanted to talk a little bit about KPIs. There are several metrics that will help you to measure success here. So the first is user adoption. If you're going to take the time to build all these new showback, chargeback reports, you want people to be using them. So you can measure this maybe by looking at how many people are logging into your FinOps tooling. If you can get some details on report views, that would be great. And so that would be one thing to look at. Additionally, this should take you into the walk to run territory for spend allocation. So hopefully you're approaching that 100% allocation back to your community. And then lastly, we talked about cloud adoption quite a bit. So ways to measure this would be speed to market, if you can measure that, or seeing your user base on your platforms increasing, or even your running hours in cloud growing as well. Across the FinOps capabilities, there's also numerous KPIs mentioned, and so you can take a look at those as well. I think that this will help impact across many of the different capabilities. And so just to wrap it up, we're going to talk a little bit about learnings and challenges.
Yeah, so the first one is that having a foundation of a showback for existing platforms can help us ensure that costs and allocations are understood and verifiable. We've also learned that it's a lot easier for consumers to pay for a shared service or platform when that expectation is set from the start, rather than introducing a fee to a previously free service. And finally, documentation is very important. Documenting our processes, like the shared responsibility model, and creating user guides for platform teams has made the whole process a lot smoother for both them and us.
And then for challenges that exist still today. So as a large enterprise, we are still pretty familiar with an annual planning cycle, which is a challenge for cloud being so much more dynamic. And so in this case, it is really hard if we're going to introduce a new shared platform chargeback mid-year. So that's why it's important, as Sergio mentioned, to do a showback first, try to give the consumers time to plan in their budgets and understand where that spend is coming from. The second challenge that we saw is now we had all these different showback or chargeback reports. And so for some of our consumers, this was kind of frustrating to have to navigate to each individual report to understand their total bill. So what we've done to solve this challenge is implement a consolidated bill view as well, where they can pick their expense center and see their AWS account, their Azure account, and let's say their MongoDB and shared EKS all in one consolidated roll-up. They can still go into these drill down reports and really try to understand that spend, but implementing a consolidated bill is definitely a good step in the right direction to see kind of your total in one place. And then lastly, implementing this, it is going to increase the demand on your centralized FinOps team. You have to support the monthly chargebacks, any issues or enhancements with those. So that's something to consider is staffing, as well as there's increased complexity at month end when we actually action the chargeback, both for our team and for our finance partners. So with that, we have about 15 minutes for questions.
Hi, I had a question about the model for the attribution of costs between the shared platform and the consuming team. We've got a circumstance where we have layers of shared services, where one shared service consumes from another shared service and so on. I was hoping you could maybe share some thoughts about how you're planning on addressing that, or how you have addressed that.
Yeah, I'm sure that exists at our enterprise today. I think what would end up happening for us is just they're going to see a lot of money coming in and out of their cost centers. So that'd be what I would expect. We would have to, I know this is not the right example, but let's say the Mongo team is also using shared EKS. If they're getting that charge mapped to them every month, we could link that into their report for the costs that they're maybe spreading out among their consumers. So it would just be another layer of complexity.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I just want to ask about how you dealt with pushback from these product owners or application owners when it comes to chargeback, particularly when they feel the allocations are probably not accurate. So how did you deal with that?
Yeah, I think for pushback from the consumers, a lot of what we try to do is just act as an intermediary as the FinOps team, and so we'll put that responsibility on the platform team as they're documenting and capturing their chargeback. It's their responsibility to educate their consumers and work with the finance controllers of their consumers. So we provide guidance on doing that, but try not to get into the middle so that we're more of the neutral party.
Great presentation, and thank you for the call out or shout out, Sergio. Quick question, just curious about how you're getting the labor in the tool for Snowflake.
Yeah, for Snowflake specifically, the team decided on a fixed labor amount, and so we ingest that through the data ingestion process, and then we have an allocation for it, so the labor charge goes back to 2 different teams in the enterprise, and so when it's part of that shared chargeback, it gets spread out accordingly.
And there's other platforms as well that will just want to add a fixed percentage on top of whatever usage costs they're already seeing to account for those support costs. So that scales with the usage that the team is doing.
Thanks for a great presentation. My question would be, initially, how do you catch or how do you realize if it's worth it to adopt to a new service? So because it's a lot of effort, you have to maintain the logic behind, and how did you do that initial, waiting if it's worth doing it?
Right now, we haven't had, I don't think, a very formal vetting process. So if somebody is interested in having a chargeback, we've been pretty flexible on setting it up for them. It's mainly those prerequisites that Sergio covered in the beginning. So we want to make sure that they have other consumers within the enterprise rather than just trying to farm out the spend in their account.
So I'm at the very beginning of my showback chargeback journey. How long did it take you guys to kind of get to where you're at right now?
A long time. So Vic started FinOps at Cigna in 2018, probably. We were in that initial model that we showed for, I would say, several years, and then these shared platform chargebacks really have started to expand in the past year. Once we got one implemented, I think people heard about it and were like, oh, I want to do that too, and so it's been really rapid adoption since then.
I have a question to build off that. I'm impressed by the amount of services you do shared allocations on. When you implement it, and you talked about the timing challenge, do you ever do it mid-fiscal year, or do you always wait for the beginning of the next fiscal year? And if you do, how long of a lead up do you use to plan for that?
We've been implementing it mid-year still.
You guys are crazy.
I don't know if everybody likes us, but yeah, so we do implement mid-year. We just expect them to set that expectation with their consumers. I would say a few months of show back before chargeback, ideally. So that's our general approach.
Hey, you guys are where I aspire to be, so awesome. My question is related to, was the entire chargeback process and the allocation process something finance drove, or did you have to convince your finance teams on how to break it down and kind of take it step by step from there?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think chargeback initially was really driven by executive sponsorship. So when we were moving into public cloud, our infrastructure lead didn't want to own all of that spend when he wasn't having really any control over it. So that was the initial driver. From there, from a finance perspective, we mainly work with our team's finance controller. And so I think he was able to help socialize that with his peers. But it was really engineering driven.
Hey, how do you distribute the storage charges? Like, we use a lot of Splunk, okay, so we centralize the logging system. So how do you distribute the charges across the departments, or what are the chargebacks?
I think we base it on the different platforms. So whatever the driver for this spend is how we're going to allocate it back, which is why that platform team engagement is so important, so that they can tell us what the right cost driver is for their platform.
Hi. So do you have any tools that prevents like disputes before they become chargebacks?
No dispute tools specifically. We do have the teams approve their charge before we execute the chargeback. So they're going to know better than I do if the data looks right for the month. So we'll have them take a look at that before we implement the chargeback at month end. But otherwise, just a lot of data validation checks, and so far, so good.
Thank you.
I would also add that they offer FinOps office hours, and they're very available to teams if they have questions or need help with anything. So I think that's a big part of their success, too.
Nice catch. I didn't spill. Okay. Hi. I may have missed this piece, but how, I guess, are you 100% allocated? You are?
Yeah, we are.
And then, so my next question would be, was there a baking time between your showback process to moving into a chargeback process?
Chargeback for the account level really started out of the gate, so we were very fortunate in that respect. Teams were expecting to pay for their cloud spend right away, but there was that time period for the shared platforms where they're expected to do a showback for their consumers at least a few months so that they have a good feel of that spend.
Hi, great presentation. I just wanted to know how you handled things like credits and spend requirements and built that in.
Credits are fun. So we do use our Aptio tool set to reverse out big enterprise credits. So that's one place where we'll use the line item and remove it from all of the accounts. And then that way we can apply it to the right place. Otherwise, for commitments, I'm thinking you mean like RIs and savings plans. So I'll let Sergio cover that one because he talked about it a little bit.
Yeah, so we track who uses these RIs and SPs and charge back to all accounts that are leveraging them based on how much they used of those reserved instances or savings plans.
First you said the whole mid-year implementation thing, and I was like, what? And then you're like, product teams are accountable for their allocation of costs. Do you frequently get questions from the product teams like, hey, how did this, do they ever ask you for reconciliation help or things like that?
Yeah, definitely. Michelle kind of mentioned it, but we have a full engagement model for our team, and so we'll have teams that are at a lot of different stages of that FinOps maturity. So there will be teams that know to look in the FinOps tooling and understand their spend, and there are other teams that we will get a reach out and really provide them feedback on where exactly these charges are coming from. Something that the team will do is show them in, let's say, AWS Cost Explorer, here's the charge you're seeing, here's how you would see that in Cloudability, and then where is that in our total cost tools so that I can really understand what's driving my spend every month.
Nicole, talk about how you're leveraging the FinOps SAR program too. That's a great program that you're starting.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. So FinOps czar model, what we try to do is we have our centralized FinOps team, which is pretty lean, and then we encourage the different application areas and senior leaders to have FinOps czars in their own specific organization that are kind of an extension of our team. And so in that case, they can help to educate them on their chargebacks. They can talk to them about right sizing, help push out those opportunities in the right way as well. So maybe for one team, it makes sense to integrate it with Jira versus for another team, something different would be more effective. And so we do rely on those partners across the enterprise.
Getting ready for the Olympics.
So I think I'm struggling to understand. So you have service providers essentially within the company that are making these platforms that they want to be able to charge back. Are you governing those things all throughout the life cycle? So in other words, I have an experience where somebody had this whiz-bang thing and everybody wanted to use it, or they wanted everybody to use it, and then that platform changed such that it vaporized budgets because it became so expensive and it happened without cognizance of the downstream users.
Yeah, I think from a governance model perspective, when there's a new platform or really any new workload moving into public cloud, we govern it through an end-to-end governance process, which includes a well-architected review, which Sergio can tell you more about. But we don't gate the users on the platform specifically. That would be something that the platform team does control. But I'll let Sergio talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so we have a whole path to production process that we have teams go through in which they have to meet with a whole bunch of separate areas in the company, like security, us. Us specifically, we do well-architected review. So we'll have two folks from the cloud COE review the architecture for the solution team and make sure that it follows like all the different pillars from the well-architected review. We also have things like what we call FMEA in game day, which is essentially ensuring that the solution has all the correct failure modes and alerting in place. So if anything does go wrong, that everyone is alerted, that needs to be alerted.
That's awesome. I can hear from the questions and the questions I have that the folks who know how impressive it is, what you're accomplishing. So big round of applause for our presenters.
Thanks for watching. Check out more FinOps X 2024 content on our YouTube channel on the 2024 playlist. Support our channel by liking, subscribing, clicking the notification bell, and by leaving comments and questions for our speakers. We appreciate your support.